If you're going to be dead completely, there is no insoluble impediment to that proposal, but it is easier to show you than to tell you verbally. Is it about a bicycle? No. Are you sure? Certain. Not about a motorcycle? No. One with overhead valves and a dynamo for light? Or with racing handlebars? No. Well, in that circumstantial eventuality, there can be no question of a motor bicycle. So here lies the body of Brian O'Nolan, otherwise known as Flann O'Brien, Myles na gCopaleen, Anne Cruskeen Lawn, George Noel, and many other names besides. So who was this man? Why did he need so many names? Brendan Behan once said that you had to look at Brian O'Nolan twice to make sure that he was there at all. No one knew what Flann O'Brien looked like. To begin our story, we have to go north to the town of Strabane in County Tyrone. In the year 1911, Strabane was a busy, bustling market town with a population of around 10,000 people. There were monthly fairs, there was a busy canal, there was a railhead connecting to Derry, Belfast, Dublin, Enniskillen and Donegal. On the 5th of October 1911, Brian O'Nolan, third son, born to Michael V and Agnes Nee Gormley, was born at number 15 Bowling Green, Strabane. It was probably one of the oldest roads in the world. I found it hard to think of a time when there was no road there, because the trees and the tall hills and the fine views of bogland had been arranged by wise hands for the pleasing picture they made when looked at from the road. Without a road to have them looked at from, they would have a somewhat aimless, if not a futile aspect. Brian's father, Michael Victor O'Nolan, had grown up in Belfast, had come to Strabane in 1897 when he was posted to the town as a customs and excise officer. He had been born in 1875 in the village of Killyclougher, outside Omagh. At this point I've arranged to talk to Joe Martin and Brendan Harkin from Killyclougher and to discuss the connections with Michael O'Nolan and the GAA. The area of Killyclougher. So Brendan and Joe, we're now here in Killyclougher. We've traced the line from Dublin, and we're looking to trace the history of the O'Nolan family before they ended up in Strabane. So what's the story here?
Well, bhí sean athair Brian, sean athair Myles, ag tagas there nómai, teach scoil model school. Bhí sé tagas nach ró.
Bhí sé in a muintir seáil an scoil ins na hachtaí, níge déart na seachtaí solar pósa é.
Agus pósa Cailín as an parósta seo. Cailín dar bhanam Jean Mellon.
Jean Mellon.
Bhí na Mellon in ar gcónaí héas an sin ar T-Velad an parósta san escradúi. Agus nuair a pósa iad hanig siad go dtí mul mór.
Hanig siad a dús go dtí muine dearag. Dearag muine ar an T-Velad an Omagh, agus an sin hanig siad an seo go mul mór. Agus is an seo sa teach an eice leis an tépal an seo a rugadh Mícheál O'Nolan athair Myles na gCopaleen.
Agus chuaigh Mícheál agus a dhearthar go dtí an scoil seo.
Caróise?
Just an eice leis an chapel, an T-Velad an chapel.
Bhí siad an seo ar scoil ar fá couple of bliain, agus an sin daistir siad go Belfaste. Ach an céad idithas a bhí ag Mícheál O'Nolan an seo ar an scoil I Gilligan.
So maybe we should go over to look at the house in the field where the family were born and grew up.
Well, níl in seaas ar seach bailí antí ach gur mar sin héan teach bé an job go.
Well, that was a long walk up there now to come to the house of Michael V. O'Nolan where he was born. Joe, you said it was a Jack Bug. Well, it's definitely a very small house.
Well, teach bag tuaithe agus cai tú cymni go raibh siad in a gcónaí seo a nach géad déag seach chuig. Fiche blian is chuig a ní an gcuirt a mhór. So bhí teach réasanta a bhí an do rám sin.
Teach compórteach agus bhí
agus áit an starhfuil seo mar is an seo a rugadh ahar Myles na gCopaleen.
It must have been a lovely place to live, out in the country, looking out over the fields.
Oh, is any as an áit sé seo in Larn na tuaithe.
Gentlemen, now that I've got you in Killyclogher, right place, right time, I want to talk to you about Michael O'Nolan, his influence on Irish culture and in developing of the Gaelic Athletic Association in the Strabane district.
Is einta ar fad an tionachar a bhí ag Myles O'Nolan ar Chumlú Clas Gael ar an Tráháin ag chun Tyrone agus a Gúigeála an Trúracha. Na what is sin fear Brandan?
Bhí some aige in Ahanrod Gaelach, you know, on Ceol, on Dausa, on Changa, agus Michliki. Agus no Corsair bun on Feis Mór, Strabane.
So tell me then, he was involved in developing the fish, he was involved in the Irish language development, he was involved in setting up the local club in Strabane, he was involved in the Tyrone, and he was involved with Ulster. All of those things.
Chuir sé Chumlú Clas Gael ar bun, ar an Tráháin, i Tyrone agus a Gúigeála. Bhí sé ina chéad uachtaran de Chumlú Clas Gael i Tyrone, lás uachtaran, chéad lás uachtaran de Chomhairleála, agus an dara uachtaran de Chomhairleála. Bhí sé mór, bhí sé go hanmhór. An duine is mó béidir is star Gúigeála, star Chumlú Clas Gael a Gúigeála, in céad in sna bhlianta sin ó ní géad déagas a trí go dtí ní géad déagas a hacht a ní.
In 1906, Michael O'Nolan married Agnes Gormley. The service was held at Murlough Church outside Lifford. The service, quite unusual, was conducted mostly in Irish by Michael's brothers, Garage and Peter. Brian was born on the 5th of October 1911. He was the third son of Michael and Agnes, after Garage and Kieran. It was rather unique in the family because they only spoke Irish in the family circle. They were not encouraged to mix with other children and did not attend school. They moved briefly to Tullanegrania. They moved to Bowling Green in 1911. We're concentrating on a very famous person, Brian O'Nolan, who became Myles na gCopaleen, Flann O'Brien, Mr. Know-all.
Yes.
Brian O'Nolan and Fidelma Hassan. The one thing you have in common is we're both born in the same house.
Yes, unfortunately, but I didn't rise to such fame as he did.
You weren't a writer of the same
No, I'm afraid not.
The door to the front room was immediately on your right hand.
Side.
And
And
then-
the stairs were on the right hand side down the hall. As you went up the stairs, it opened out into what?
The first little place you went to was this bathroom. Then there were another 4 steps up, which took you to the drawing room, which in those days was the drawing room. and then a bedroom beside that. That was still the drawing room,
The
middle
drawing
windows.
room would be both windows.
Yes.
And there was no lighting whatsoever. There was gas downstairs, but nothing beyond the second floor. There was nothing
So we
upstairs.
carried the candles up
They
just
carried a
Correct,
candle.
candles, yes.
Yes. And in those days, looking out from the windows there, you looked onto a big open space with absolutely nothing in it. Nobody can ever remember a blade of grass growing in it, even what was called the bowling green. It was a wonderful place. Certainly I found it a wonderful place to grow up in.
In 1912, Michael was temporarily transferred to Glasgow, and from Glasgow they moved back to Inchicore in Dublin in 1916, and by 1917 they were back in Strabane in Ballycolman. Brian O'Nolan had cherished memories of his childhood and subsequent holidays in Strabane, which he described as the happy-go-lucky town at the confluence of two tumbling rivers. His brother Kieran wrote that the days he and Brian and brother Garage spent by the Mourne were the happiest days of their lives, particularly the hours spent in the long grass of the riverbank, while the sun seemed to stand still in the cloudless summer sky, and they could hear the distant clang of mowing machines and the faint hum of the turbines in the linen mill. In Kieran's book Oige and Jarahar, he described, "During the summer, we spent a lot of time at the riverside, wading about in the water with our boots tied together by the laces and slung around our necks. It was a favourite pastime. I do not remember what we were doing. We certainly were not fishing. That activity came into its own only when the river was in flood. In any event, we became very knowledgeable about the stretch of the river near the town. We could pinpoint every hole and underwater rock and the likely location of a resting trout or a coiled eel. On other days, we would go up the riverbank as far as Camus, where the water is dark and deep even in summer. 7 fields up the bank of the river, there was a chance you would see a seal, and there would be hundreds of swallows skimming and diving when the midgets appeared in the sunlight. These were stirring times in the political life of the country. War and unrest were in the air. Nevertheless, if I had to choose the quietest, happiest days I can remember in my whole life, I would pick the years 1917 to 1920. I remember especially long summer days when we would be lying on the high grassy banks at the riverside. Days when you could imagine that the sun was standing in the sky, with time suspended. No movement except for the river, and no sound except for the hum of insects and the faraway throb of the shirt factory giving out the pulse of summer. The river was only one aspect of our lives in Strabane. Apart from our life at home, the rapport we had with my mother's family influenced us enormously. In 1923, when Brian was 12 years of age, his father Michael was promoted and transferred to Dublin. They lived at number 25 Herbert Street, close to the Grand Canal between Mount Street and Bagot Street Bridge. You know, as I'm standing here throwing stones into the River Mourne, it reminds me of whenever we were living in 25 Herbert Place. Garage and Brian and I, Kieran, our bedroom was on the 4th floor. We were always experimenting. So one day, Brian dropped paper out of the 4th floor and we watched it floating down. And it was a lovely experiment. So the next time we tried it and the paper was heavier. And later we tried a pebble and we watched it as it went and hit the gravel. The next day we tried it with a bigger stone, until one night we decided a bit of devilment. We got larger stones and we waited until a single passer-by was coming along the dark street. And just as he passed our house, we opened the window and threw the stone out, and it fell on the gravel. And the passer-by turned in astonishment, thinking that there was a ghostly figure behind. Looked around and could see nothing. We thought this was great fun, so we tried it a few times. Until one night, we tried it once too often. With a large stone, we threw it to the ground, but it hit the metal railings. And this passer-by, he didn't think it was a ghostly presence. He went to the house next door and complained that stones had been thrown from high up in the building. The next night, when we decided to try it again, we stopped when we saw little glistening lights among the trees, only to discover that it was the shine of a policeman's uniform. The neighbours were watching for us. We never did it again. The boys were at last sent to school. From Blackrock he attended University College Dublin, from where he graduated with a degree in Celtic languages in literature and language. But he took up a post in the civil service to help his mother financially with the upbringing of his 8 siblings. He rose to the position of private secretary, advising several government ministers. In 1938, he wrote At Swim Two Birds, which was a literary fantasy. It was a novel about a man who was writing a book, about a man who was writing a book, about a man who was writing a novel. Kevin, we've been tracing the life and times of Brian O'Nolan, and delighted to meet yourself and find out what you remember about your Uncle Brian.
Well, Michael, vague recollections of meeting him a long time ago. He died when I was 8, but I do remember him coming to our house in Limerick when I was 7, and I do distinctly remember him strolling up the driveway with his case, with his writings and his traditional coat and hat, and he came in, and I think he had a couple of glasses of whiskey with my mother.
He wasn't on a bicycle at the time,
no? No. I think he had got a taxi or something. He got the train from Dublin, and they had a great chat. I think they used to get on very well. And then later, my father arrived, and they had a conference. But that was about 1965, so it was just a year before he died.
So he died on the 1st of April 1966.
That's correct.
So what would your family have made of Brian?
Yeah, our grandfather Victor suddenly died and left them in a pretty precarious situation. So he took up the leadership, really, and it was I would say it's very tough for him. Yeah.
Because he always wanted to be a professional writer, but I don't think he could have afforded to have lived on his writings. So he joined the civil service and became very successful.
Absolutely, but I think that was it. At that time, he wouldn't have survived on writing alone, so he needed both incomes.
How would you sum up Brian now as an uncle of yours?
I think he was, from what I remember, a very shy man, but I do remember my aunt telling me when my parents were getting married, he called over to the house, and my grandmother on my mother's side thought he was a very charming man, and she really liked him, but he was very shy.
One little point always interests me, Kevin, and that is this aspect of Brian O'Nolan drinking. What would you say about that?
Well, Michael, over the years there's been a huge background to pubs with Irish writers, which has been exaggerated to suit the position, and of course he was a serious drinker. But I'd also like to make the point that he was doing 3 columns a week with the Irish Times. He never once missed a deadline. He was also writing, and of course he was working as well. So he couldn't be in a pub 14 hours a day and get this done. The draw of the Irish Times was a huge mental pull on him, because it had to be there, it had to be funny, and it had to be topical, and it had to be on time.
Terry's family has owned this pub since 1921, and Terry, Brian O'Nolan would have been a customer in here.
Yes, the O'Rourke family have owned this pub since 1921, as you mentioned, and it was actually purchased by my grandmother. She didn't work in it for a terribly long number of years, but once my father became a teenager, he got involved in it, and he worked in it continuously until the time he died, which was in 1980. But I never knew Brian O'Nolan, but I used to hear as I was growing up as a young boy the very many stories that he related about Brian, and I know my father had a great regard for him, and sort of used to refer to him as a very likable rogue. But Brian O'Nolan would look in the window, and my father would either say, "Yes, come in," or perhaps gesture, "No, you're not very welcome on this occasion." Yeah, but Brian wouldn't be terribly happy if he was refused, and he would sort of say to my father, on occasion, I've been barred in far better pubs than this over the years. So he got his own back on my father.
Very good.
But he was much liked, a very, very likable person. Could be difficult at times, but a very pleasant customer, and a customer that we sort of have sort of cherished over the years, because he became so well known and such a character.
"Feel my chin," McCrushkin said, smiling enigmatically. "We call it that," the sergeant explained, "because you don't grow old here. When you leave here, you will be the same age as you were coming in, and the same stature and latitude. There is an 8-day clock here with a patent balanced action, but it never goes." "How can you be sure you don't grow old here?" "Feel my chin," McCrushkin said again. "It is simple," the sergeant said. "The beard does not grow, and if you are fed, you do not get hungry. And if you are hungry, you don't get hungrier. Your pipe will smoke all day and will still be full, and a glass of whiskey will still be there no matter how much of it you drink. And it does not matter in any case, because it will not make you drunker than your own sobriety." "Indeed," I muttered. "I have been here for a long time this today morning," McCrushkin said, "and my jaw is still as smooth as a woman's back, and the convenience of it takes my breath away. It is a great thing to downface the old razor." In 1941, he wrote his only lengthy piece in Irish. The piece was called An Béal Bocht, in which he poked fun at Irish language enthusiasts and the Irish culture. Brian O'Nolan once claimed that his vocation was the chastisement of the folly and the hypocrisy of modern-day Ireland. He often scoffed about the writers, the theses researchers, especially Americans, who beat a path to Dublin to research James Joyce. Ironically, scholars, research writers, especially Americans, now beat a path to Dublin to research and look into the life and times of the man from Strabane, the man known as Brian O'Nolan, alias Flann O'Brien, alias Myles na Goblin, alias An Béal Bocht. He died in Dublin on the 1st of April 1966. He would have found this ironic because that was All Fool's Day.
But then the sun came out again and sent us the happy news.